Great. Thank you very much, Venki. We will move on to Anit's presentation now.
Hello. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Not sure how my hardware and digital technologies would hold up, but this is great. Thank you very much for the invitation, and really pleased to be in the company of 23 people that I see online across the globe, I presume. My name is Anit Mukherjee. I'm a Policy Fellow at the Center for Global Development. We are also a think and do tank. I think it's the it's kind of the way that we define ourselves these days. And I think what we have been doing in over the last 2-3 years is to look at closely the way in which the relationship between the citizen and the state is changing due to introduction of digital technology. And this is not only limited to an advanced country like Estonia or India, where also I come from, but across the globe, basically. We look at countries in sub-Saharan Africa, mostly Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya. We do some work in Bangladesh, as well as in India, of course. And in countries like Mexico and Bolivia. So we have a wide range of experiences, and I'll not go into everything, but I'd like to share a few of the ideas related to how citizens and state, the relationships are changing, and how trust and consent are becoming integral to those to the delivery of governance. So what does data sharing mean for public service delivery? And as Jonathan said, I mostly work in this area. So the interactions that I will talk about are mostly the citizen and the state, but obviously some of that moves over to the area of private sector. Absolutely, there is no doubt about that. And some of the stuff that Venki has talked about is also relevant to our discussion. So the first point to note is that there is the use of personal data in a digital environment to redesign public services create both opportunities and challenges. And I think both Linar and Venki mentioned some of that. There is, however, a little understanding of how digital processes often mandate sharing of data through forced or implicit consent. So, and I'll come to that in a concrete example. Sometimes you give up a lot of your personal information just because the scheme, the design of that benefit or the service or the scheme forces you to do so. Without that, you are not going to be able to access that service. And also implicitly, because sometimes at the back end, a lot of databases get merged, and those are not very visible to the person, to the data holder. And what we feel is that the role of digital technology is increasing in three basic settings. One is systems which provide a wide-ranging and universal ID. This is Estonia, this is India, this is Pakistan, this is going into Bangladesh as well, in Indonesia. So around 140 countries have some form of electronic ID systems, and these are generating huge amounts of data for governance. And second is, I think, mobiles. I think that a lot of these delivery systems are moving on to mobile platform. As somebody, as a previous presenter mentioned, telecom data is becoming a gold mine of a lot of insight, and how we use this data is going to be critical for going forward. And the third is the massive explosion in financial products and financial inclusion and payments, which again are linked with mobile technology and linked with ID. So these three taken together, this ecosystem is generating voluminous amounts at real-time data, which some of us are still grappling to understand what that means for governance systems. And there are complementarities between the three. As I mentioned, there's ID, which is used for efficient know your customer, and Linar mentioned about using opening bank accounts. We have seen in India, 350 million bank accounts were opened in 3 years, a lot of it due to the use of Aadhaar and the eKYC. Mobile access to information and digital transactions, and finance offers a motivation and additional motivation to also roll out ID and mobile networks, because a lot of the revenues generated from mobile networks are coming from their financial aspect rather than communication. So those are three very broad kind of trends that we see, and globally and across the world. Next slide, please. So in this area, in this broad kind of trend that we see globally, how does the data sharing with government, especially with public institutions, increase trust? And our work on the ground, and I'll go into a little bit in detail in the next few slides, but what we find is that there are 5 essential ingredients to increase trust when a beneficiary is parting or sharing his or her data with the government. One is greater agency. So this is about having more control over the benefits or services that you receive from the government. Second is higher efficiency, which for a lot of people across the world is essentially reduced corruption. The impression of state, the mistrust of the state from a citizen's point of view is often mediated by his or her experience with corruption. So if you visibly reduce corruption, and by perforce you're improving efficiency of the system, of the governance system, then you have better trust and people trust these systems more. So third, I would say, is better quality. When you have a feedback mechanism where you ask the beneficiaries about their experience with the system, and if there is a positive feedback, and if the government can capture that feedback, then one finds that there is a more trust. And I'll come to all these examples concretely in the next few slides. The fourth and the fifth are improved equity, essentially targeting inclusion and marginalized groups. Often these groups are the ones who are not included in traditional systems, and if digital systems can target and include marginalized groups, then that is a plus, improves trust. And finally, it's increasing empowerment, which is giving beneficiaries or subjects better information, choice, and voice. And that's how we have kind of framed it. Next slide, please. So here's a pretty quick description of one program that we looked at closely. This is Rajasthan, a state in India, which is about the size of Germany, both in terms of size and population. What they decided to do is to re-enroll every person into a card, which on the left-hand side is the person, and then the middle there are 3 or 4 steps. And then finally, you get a card with the person's photograph. And interestingly, if we can click one, sorry, I forgot to remove the animation. The person is actually the head of the family, and this is a family card. So you have a listing of the head of the family and the members. That head of the family has to be a woman, and that was the mandate of the scheme. And this was in the previous government, so we don't know what will happen because the government of the state changed. But latest, what we have found, what I've heard is that this will remain in some way, shape, or form. And what this card is supposed to do is something what Linar was alluding to, where the state is proactive in providing benefits to this set of people who are included in this family. So, for example, if somebody is listed at age 62, at 65, if she would become eligible for an old age pension, then the state will just inform that I have included you in the old age pension. Can we have one click, please? Yeah. So here you see what kind of information this data subject is giving up. In the card itself, there is a bank account number, which is circled the top circle, and then the Aadhaar number, which is the bottom circle. And those 2 are mandatory. So you have to have a bank account and an Aadhaar number, and those are pretty private data points, plus your photograph and the photograph of other members. The other members could be listed with or without Aadhaar, which essentially everybody probably does have an Aadhaar. So that is there. And then there's date of birth and address. So there's a lot of information that you are sharing, but essentially whether you get the benefit of this sharing or not will depend on how much you trust the system, which is exactly what we'll look at in the next slide. And one more click, please. Yeah. So we looked at 3 programs. The top one is a direct benefit transfer of cooking gas subsidy, which is given to about 180 million households. Obviously, Rajasthan is not 180 million, but it has about 30 million households which get that subsidy. We looked at pensions, social pensions given to everyone who qualifies on an age and a means basis, and the public distribution system where food rations for about 82 million beneficiaries in the state, where 50% are below poverty line. These are food rations given in kind. And if you look at the blue bars, it seems that if I were a government servant and trying to implement this program and with all the complexity, I would be pretty happy with these numbers. However, there is a lot of gray, not much red, but quite a bit of gray areas, and literally gray areas because we don't know, or the beneficiaries didn't have an idea about how the system is better or worse than the previous one. So the blue bars are people who think that the digital system is better, unequivocally. The red ones are unequivocally they are worse. The gray ones are we don't know. So basically qualified kind of support for the system. Next slide, please. And here in Rajasthan, as well as in other places, what we are looking at is that people who are more digitally literate have greater trust in these digital systems. And here we just are publishing a small report on the primary education stipend program in Bangladesh, where there's about 13 million stipends are given out to mothers on a mobile money platform, which is called SureCash. So every 6 months, the mother gets half-yearly stipends on a mobile money account. And here we see that being able to read and write SMS, which we take as an instrument of digital literacy, kind of full digital literacy, is associated with a positive opinion of the system, saying that there's more agency, that they can get money when they would want to, and also owning a phone, honestly. So having a phone is an important element of this whole digital ecosystem. And owning a phone is associated with being able to read or write SMS. We tested whether not being able to read or write SMS is significantly different statistically than in their perception, and we found that yes, it was. So, but overall, I must say that the overall perception was 80% positive. But here we are talking about those who said that they didn't have a positive opinion of the system. So essentially what this means is greater digital literacy and leads to greater trust. Not causality, I would be careful, but at least correlation. Next slide, please. And this one, we looked at a very advanced system, and this is kind of approaching the first 2 systems were more or less, I would say, moderately digitally literate systems. But this one is approaching, this is Andhra Pradesh in India, and it is approaching, in some ways, the digital sophistication is approaching Estonia. Obviously, we can't be Estonia overnight, as Linar said, but it's approaching Estonia. So it's a very advanced digital system. As you can see, they're using this state is using digital ID and technology to improve service delivery, minimize exclusion, active beneficiary feedback, combining administrative and survey data, and reinforcing local accountability. So all this is kind of coming together. And as you can see, the gentleman holding up an interesting machine, which has an iris reader, a fingerprint reader, and a face camera all integrated. So the whole ecosystem of authentication is being integrated into one machine, and that is being used to deliver different kinds of services. And if you look at the kind of the support, it's pretty impressive. We looked at 3 things: the PDS, which is the food rations, 70% support; social pensions, which is a distribution in cash; on authentication, it's 84%; and land records, which was stunned us, but it was 97% of people. This is digitized land records, which is linked to your ID. which is somewhat like what Estonia does. So that has 97% approval from landowners. This is not people who are tenant farmers. So I think what we have in some way, my timer has gone off, so I'm over my 15-minute limit. But what it shows is that you have a lot of trust that is built into the system, a lot of support. But if you look at the next slide, what we found very interesting was that we asked people two things. One is, do you like the new system compared to the old one? And as you can see in the blue bars, there's a lot of people gave reasons why they like the new system, like don't get diverted, so it's corruption. Grains are delivered on time, so efficiency. Weighing system has improved. Again, corruption, efficiency. Sometimes people say nothing has become worse. However, we also asked these people who said the new system is better, which is 390 out of 560 households, do they think something has become worse? Interestingly, some people say that transaction time has increased. Again, the blue bar on the right side. And some people also said, about 40% said authentication failures are frequent. That's why they don't see, that's the drawback of the system, although they like it overall. But the 27% or 33% who said system is worse, which is the red bars, 100% of them said that they don't like it because authentication failures are frequent. So in this kind of a very advanced, digital environment where you're doing everything on the hardware, you are transforming your digital governance systems at the back end, even the interaction between the beneficiary and the technology environment mediates your trust in the system. But however, if you look at the yellow box, the basic idea of increasing trust is because nobody can take my grains now. So the agency over your entitlement, the efficiency of the delivery, these are things that that beneficiaries kind of take away from the system as something which has become better. So finally, last slide. What do we mean when how these sharing of data and use of technology, use of personal authentication, how can it improve trust? And I think we have 4 channels which are not mutually exclusive. One is the integration and an analysis of real-time administrative data, which there is a box in notes from the field where it shows that this person was couldn't be authenticated, then had to go back, but they got a call to come back within 15 minutes because somebody was remotely monitoring the authentication failures. I think beneficiary feedback and monitoring of service quality, if there is visible improvement in that, even while giving up some of your data to the government, I think that shows that gives people a sense of more trust in the system. The third point, and this is coming out very clearly in many of the studies we are doing across the world, is the governments promise a lot through these digital systems. They promise that corruption will be reduced, you will be included in the system, efficiency will improve. And if there is no visible improvement in those or visible move towards those promises being met, very soon the trust dissipates. We looked at fuel subsidy reform in Nigeria, and everybody knows about what's happening with Gilets Jaunes protests and stuff. But in Nigeria, they haven't been able to reform their absolutely crazy subsidies that they give on petroleum because the people don't trust the government to actually do a good job and not fritter it away. And last, I think it's the issue, and the Nigeria case also for us illustrated that if you can visibly, the people understand that there is, the government is doing something to reduce corruption and leakage through use of digital delivery mechanisms where they are giving up a lot of, they're giving a lot of information to the government, the trust is visibly increased. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions. But thank you very much for this opportunity to share some of our work with this audience.
Great, thank you so much, Anit. I have a question, and welcome others to chime in as well. So my first question is about the use of personal data in the system. So a lot of what you're talking about is trust at the service delivery level, right? That the particular service will or will not be delivered as expected. I know you and I have talked a bit about redressal systems and what happens when individuals feel their data is inaccurate or being misrepresented. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing at that level, how individuals are gaining trust in the system and the way their data is being used in order to then get to that service delivery level that you're discussing here.
Great question. I think the second point in the slide is the beneficiary feedback. So what we see in a lot of ways is that the service, at the point of service, systems are changing faster than the feedback systems are being performed. So sometimes the feedback systems are still very much in the old world where you go to, you send in some, hand in a piece of paper, or now it's like, oh, we have a grievance portal. But what we are talking about is there is active feedback seeking from the state or from entities. And by the way, these feedback mechanisms in Andhra, for example, is all done in a private sector mode. So there's a call center that has been set up, and they're using a lot of those feedback loops that the private sector uses. It's nothing different from what Amazon uses for rating products or any other e-commerce company. So I think they're using those kind of ideas to rank or to solicit feedback actively. Secondly, what they're also doing, and these systems, the way it builds trust, is that it also puts accountability very clearly on the people who are delivering that service. So if I know that this ration shop, we call them, but the place where you get your food ration, has 20% authentication failure, there is somebody who goes there and figures out why that 20% is happening month after month. So that kind of a redressal and feedback loop, where the government goes out and seeks proactively the views of the people through call centers, through direct mailers, through SMS messages, build some kind of trust. And if they see that is then there's an improvement at the service delivery level, that reinforces that trust.
Great, thank you. We have a question here, which I'm just going to read to you so as to not misrepresent in summarizing it. So state governments in India are building huge databases without much concern for privacy. A leak of data could significantly destroy user trust and also bring positive use cases to an abrupt halt. How do we sensitize governments that they are custodians of data and need to build better privacy into their systems?
I think that's a great question. So the way, state governments are in no way different from central government in their hunger for more data. And the way Indian system is set up, there are state resident data hubs which are being used to warehouse a lot of this data. And I think there is a leaf to be taken from the private sector here, both in terms of the way the private sector has mismanaged data, as well as what proactive steps they're taking to ensure that things don't go out of hand. And again, there is an issue of capacity. Even the best functioning states across the globe. I mean, there are other countries which are also, pretty much advanced in collecting and warehousing data, do have to be on their guard, because it's not an easy thing to safeguard the data, and first of all, to reduce the risk of leakage of the data, like we have seen in many other instances in social media platforms, for example, or proactively seeking user consent and protecting privacy. And those two things, one of the crazy things about this whole issue and why I'm interested is that there are very few countries in the developing world which actually have some kind of an idea of how to protect massive amounts of citizen data that they warehouse. And not only India, but many, many other countries. And GDPR coming in has kind of muddied the waters a little bit because everybody wants to move that framework. But whether that is the appropriate framework or not is a question that needs to be answered. So I take the point that governments are building databases, so are many people across the world, including the private sector, and we need to have better understanding of what that means in terms of user privacy. That's for sure.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Any final burning questions for Anit before we wrap up here?